A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Imagine you are standing at the edge of the tarmac at 3 in the morning. The passenger terminals are dark, the duty-free shops are shuttered, and the last red-eye flight landed hours ago. But suddenly, the sky starts glowing with landing lights. One after another, massive Boeing 747 and 777 freighters start touching down, taxiing not toward the gates with the jet bridges, but toward a series of colossal windowless warehouses on the far side of the airfield. This is the shadow world of air cargo. A $6 trillion ecosystem that moves 35% of global trade by value, yet remains almost entirely invisible to the average traveler.
It really is a parallel universe, Corn. I am Herman Poppleberry, and today we are diving into the logistics of the sky. Today's prompt from Daniel is about this exact hidden infrastructure. He wants to know about the airports that prioritize boxes over people, why some cargo never shows up on a standard flight board, and what exactly is inside those planes that justifies a price tag 4 to 5 times higher than putting it on a ship. By the way, a quick shout out to our digital co-writer today. This episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash.
I love that Daniel brought this up because we usually think of airports as places for vacations or business trips. We forget they are actually the high-speed nervous system of the global economy. If a cargo ship is a slow-moving artery, air cargo is the electrical impulse. But let's start with the basics, Herman. Daniel asked if every international airport does this. When I am flying to visit family, am I sitting on top of a mountain of iPhones and salmon?
Most of the time, yes. That is what we call belly cargo. If you are on a wide-body aircraft like a Boeing 787 or an Airbus A350, there is a massive amount of space beneath your feet that isn't just for suitcases. Airlines like Emirates or Lufthansa actually make a huge chunk of their profit from that space. In fact, on some routes, the passengers are almost a break-even business, and the real profit is the mail, the electronics, and the fresh flowers sitting in the hold. But that is only one half of the story. The other half involves dedicated freighters, planes with no windows and giant nose-loading doors. And to answer Daniel's question, while almost every major airport handles some belly cargo, the infrastructure required for serious freight operations is a completely different beast.
But wait, if I'm sitting on top of all that cargo, does it affect the flight? Like, if they pack 10 tons of fresh cherries under my feet, does the pilot have to fly differently?
It definitely changes the weight and balance calculations. Every single pallet, what they call a unit load device or ULD, is weighed to the pound. The load masters have to distribute that weight perfectly so the center of gravity stays within a very narrow window. If you put all the heavy car parts in the back and the light pillows in the front, the plane might literally tip onto its tail during loading or become uncontrollable in the air. So even on a passenger flight, there's a complex game of Tetris happening below you while you're picking out which movie to watch.
Right, because a box doesn't need a Cinnabon or a bathroom, but it might need a forklift, a customs broker, and a temperature-controlled warehouse. So, how does an airport decide it wants to be a cargo hub, rather than just a place where people catch flights? Is it just about having a long runway?
It's much more than the pavement, though you do need thick concrete to handle the weight of a fully loaded freighter. It comes down to geographic positioning and dedicated infrastructure. Some airports are hybrids, like Hong Kong International. It is the busiest cargo airport in the world, handling 4.5 million tons of freight annually, but it also processes 70 million passengers. They have essentially built 2 separate cities on one airfield. They have separate road networks for the trucks so they don't get stuck behind tourist buses. Then you have the super hubs like Memphis or Louisville, where the passenger side is almost an afterthought compared to the massive sorting facilities for FedEx and UPS.
I want to dig into that cargo-only idea Daniel mentioned. Are there places where you literally cannot buy a ticket to fly there, but the runways are screaming busy?
These are often called industrial airports or logistics hubs. A great example is Rickenbacker International in Ohio. It was an old Air Force base that was repurposed specifically for cargo. It doesn't have a traditional passenger terminal in the way you'd expect for its size. Instead, it is surrounded by millions of square feet of distribution centers. Companies fly high-fashion clothing or electronics directly there to bypass the congestion of O'Hare or JFK. By landing at a cargo-focused airport, a plane can be unloaded, the goods cleared through customs, and put on a truck within a few hours. At a massive passenger hub, that same pallet might get stuck in a warehouse queue for a day because the airport is prioritizing people.
That makes a lot of sense. If I am a box of semiconductors, I don't care about being near downtown Chicago. I just want to be near the highway. But why don't these flights show up on the big screens in the terminal? Is it just because they don't have a gate?
It is partly that, and partly the nature of the scheduling. Passenger airlines live and die by a fixed schedule published months in advance. Cargo is much more fluid. You have integrators like DHL or FedEx who have their own schedules, but you also have a massive charter market. If a car factory in Mexico has a machine breakdown and they need a part from Germany today to avoid losing millions in production, they will hire a load-on-demand freighter. These flights are often non-scheduled, so they operate on flight plans filed just hours before takeoff. They don't need a flight number like UA123, they just need a slot and a cleared runway.
It's the Uber of the sky, but for heavy machinery. How does that work in practice with air traffic control? Do they just squeeze them in between the vacationers?
Controllers treat them like any other flight once they are in the air, but on the ground, they are directed to a completely different part of the field. In many cases, these flights operate in the dead zones of the day. While you and I are sleeping at 2000 a.m., the skies over these hubs are as busy as Hartsfield-Jackson at noon. Now, Herman, you mentioned Memphis. That is the FedEx Global Super Hub. I've heard that if you look at a satellite map of Memphis at midnight, it looks like an invasion is happening. It is spectacular. Memphis handles over 3.5 million tons a year. Between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., FedEx lands a plane roughly every 90 seconds. They have a facility there called the Matrix, which can sort hundreds of thousands of packages an hour. The reason it happens at night is the overnight promise. If you send a package from Seattle to New York, it doesn't fly direct. It flies to Memphis, gets sorted in the middle of the night, and flies out to New York before the sun comes up. If you stood in the middle of that sorting facility, it would look like a scene from a sci-fi movie. Miles of conveyor belts moving at high speeds with optical scanners reading labels in milliseconds.
But what happens if a plane is late? If the Matrix is designed for this precision dance, does one thunderstorm in Denver break the whole system for the East Coast?
It's a massive contingency game. These hubs have spare aircraft sitting on the ramp with engines warm, ready to go if another plane has a mechanical failure. They also use hub bypass routes if things get really messy. But the night sort is sacred. If the sorter stops for even 15 minutes, thousands of packages miss their morning delivery vans. That's why these airports often have their own dedicated power grids and massive de-icing teams that prioritize the cargo ramps over everything else.
It's interesting how that solves the noise. Problem 2, right? Or does it create one? Most cities have curfews for loud jets at night, but these cargo hubs seem to be the exception.
That is a huge part of the political geography of cargo. To be a major cargo hub, you usually need an airport that is either far enough away from residential areas that it can operate 24/7, or a community that has accepted the noise in exchange for the massive economic engine that logistics provides. In Europe, this is a huge fight. Frankfurt is a massive cargo hub, but they have strict night flight bans to protect the sleep of people in the surrounding suburbs. That is why Leipzig-Halle Airport in Germany became the European hub for DHL. They allow night flights, so Leipzig went from a quiet regional spot to processing over 1.2 million tons of cargo a year. It's a trade-off. You get the jobs, but you hear the roar of the engines at 3:00 a.m.
So, we've got these dedicated hubs and these ghost schedules. But Daniel's prompt gets to a really sharp point about the economics. We've talked in the past about how sea freight is the king of the world because it is so cheap. If it costs $4 to fly a kilo of stuff, but only 50 cents to ship it by sea, why are we flying anything at all? Who is paying that premium?
This is where the logistics calculus gets fascinating. Logisticians use a few specific criteria to decide if something is air eligible. The first is the value to weight ratio. Think about a pallet of iPhones. A single pallet might hold 2,000 phones. If each phone is worth $1,000, that pallet is worth $2 million. The cost to fly that pallet across the Pacific might be $10,000. In the context of a $2 million shipment, $10,000 is a rounding error. It represents 0.5% of the value. If you put that same pallet on a ship, it sits for 3 weeks. That's $2 million of capital locked in a metal box, earning zero interest and risking damage or theft.
Whereas, if you tried to fly a pallet of bricks, the shipping cost would be 10 times the value of the bricks.
Precisely. It is all about the math of the margin. But it isn't just about high value. Perishability is the second big driver, and I don't just mean food. Think about fast fashion. If Zara designs a new coat that becomes a viral hit on social media, they have about a 3-week window to sell it before the trend moves on. If they put those coats on a ship from a factory in Asia to Europe, it takes 30 to 40 days. By the time the ship arrives, the trend is dead and the coats have to be cleared out at a discount. By flying them, they get them in stores in 48 hours. The speed to market justifies the cost because it prevents the product from becoming obsolete.
I never thought about fashion having an expiration date like milk, but in the world of social media trends, a month is an eternity. Does this apply to food in the big way too? I've seen blueberries from Peru in my local store in the middle of winter. Are those all flying?
A huge percentage of high-end produce flies. Think about the Beaujolais Nouveau wine from France. There is a literal race every November to get that wine to markets in Tokyo and New York on the exact same day. They use chartered freighters to move millions of bottles across the globe in a 48-hour window. Or think about Maine lobsters. If you're eating a fresh lobster in Dubai, that lobster didn't take a boat. It was packed in a specialized container with gel packs and flown in the belly of a passenger jet. The cost of the flight is built into that $50 entree price.
That is wild. So air cargo isn't just a transport method, it's a hedge against irrelevance. What about the emergency stuff? I imagine that is a huge part of the charter world we were talking about. Is it just machine parts, or does it get weirder than that?
Oh, it gets much weirder. We are talking about life and limb shipments, organs for transplant, rare isotopes for cancer treatment that have a half-life of only a few hours. If those don't fly, someone dies. There's also the production line down scenario. There is a term in aviation called AOG, aircraft on ground. If a multi-million-dollar jet is stuck in Singapore because it needs a specific engine part that is sitting in a warehouse in Toulouse, every hour that plane sits there is costing the airline tens of thousands of dollars in lost revenue and passenger rebooking. They will pay almost any price to get that part on the next available flight. The same goes for automotive assembly lines. If a factory in Tennessee is missing a specific sensor and the whole line has to stop, that costs roughly $20,000 per minute. At that point, a $50,000 charter flight is a bargain.
I also want to touch on something Daniel mentioned in his notes, the cold chain. I remember during the pandemic, everyone was talking about how the vaccines had to be kept at like -70 degrees. That sounds like a specialized airport operation. I mean, you can't just leave a box like that sitting on a hot tarmac in Dubai, right?
You absolutely cannot. It is a massive subsector. Airports like Frankfurt, Singapore, and Dublin have invested hundreds of millions into pharma zones. These are essentially giant, high-tech refrigerators that are directly connected to the tarmac. When a plane carrying biologics or vaccines lands, the pallets are moved within minutes into a temperature-controlled environment where customs processing happens inside the fridge. They have thermal dollies, basically refrigerated trailers, that meet the plane at the cargo door. You can't do that at a small regional airport. You need a specialized CEIV Pharma certification from the International Air Transport Association to prove you can maintain that chain without a single degree of fluctuation.
It's like a 5-star hotel for medicine. But how do they maintain that on the plane itself? Does the pilot just turn the AC way up in the cargo hold?
Actually, modern freighters have multi-zone climate control. You can have the forward cargo hold at a crisp 40 degrees Fahrenheit for strawberries, while the aft hold is at a steady 65 degrees for a shipment of exotic tropical fish. The pilots have a display in the cockpit specifically for cargo environment monitoring. If they see a temperature spike in hold number 3, they can adjust the bleed air from the engines to compensate. It's far more sophisticated than just turning on the AC.
Now, what about the Amazon of it all? Daniel mentioned Amazon Air. They seem to be changing the game because they aren't just an integrator like FedEx. They are the retailer, the shipper, and the airline all in one. Does that change how the airports themselves function?
Amazon is the biggest disruptor in this space in the last decade. They used to rely entirely on UPS and the Postal Service, but they realized that to hit their prime delivery windows, they needed control. They now have a fleet of over 100 aircraft. They've built a massive $1.5 billion hub at Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport, or CVG. What is interesting is that Amazon isn't just flying between major cities, they are flying between their own fulfillment centers. They are creating a closed-loop system. They don't care about freight forwarders or brokers. They are the whole ecosystem.
Does that mean they are taking business away from the traditional airports, or are they just growing the pie?
It's actually revitalizing some secondary airports. Amazon loves airports that have plenty of room to grow and aren't congested by passenger traffic. By moving into places like CVG or Lakeland in Florida, they turn these underutilized airfields into massive economic engines. It's a different kind of density. It's not about how many people are in the terminal, it's about how many sort cycles you can run in 24 hours. They are building their own sortation centers right on the ramp. It's the ultimate expression of just-in-time delivery.
I'm curious about the middle ground airports. Daniel asked about the density of cargo activity. We mentioned Hong Kong and Memphis. But what about a place like Anchorage, Alaska? I've seen it on the list of busiest cargo airports, which seems crazy because, well, it's Anchorage. There aren't that many people there buying stuff. Why is a city of 300,000 people a top 5 global cargo hub?
Anchorage is the gas station of the world for air cargo. It is one of the most fascinating places in aviation. If you look at a globe, not a flat map, but a globe, Anchorage is almost exactly in the middle of the Northern Hemisphere's industrial centers. It is within 9.5 hours of 90% of the industrialized world.
Wait, really? Even London and Tokyo?
Yes, because of the Great Circle routes, flying over the pole is the shortest distance. If a cargo plane is flying from Shanghai to New York, it can't carry enough fuel to make the whole trip if it is also full of heavy cargo. So they land in Anchorage, refuel, and take off. This allows them to trade fuel weight for payload weight. It is much more profitable to carry 10 extra tons of iPhones and stop for gas than it is to carry 10 tons of extra gas and fly non-stop. On any given day, Anchorage has more 747 traffic than almost anywhere else on Earth. It's a technical stop, but it's vital. If Anchorage shut down for a day, the supply chain between Asia and North America would snap.
That is such a cool bit of Earth geometry logic. It turns a remote outpost into a central hub just by virtue of the planet being round. But what's the turnaround time there? Do these planes sit on the tarmac for hours?
Not at all. Time is money in this business. In Anchorage, they can refuel a massive freighter in under an hour. While the fuel is pumping, the crew swaps out. Fresh pilots get on, the tired ones go to a hotel, and the plane is back in the air before the engines even have a chance to cool down. They call it gas and go. It's an assembly line of heavy metal. If you go to the Lake Hood area near the airport, you can watch these giants take off over the water every few minutes. It's a sight that most people never see because they're usually flying the lower 48 routes.
No, Herman, let's talk about the e-commerce surge Daniel mentioned. This whole Temu and Shane thing. I've heard they are literally filling up entire planes with individual small packages rather than big pallets for stores. How does an airport handle 10,000 small bags instead of one big crate?
This is a fundamental shift in how air cargo works. Traditionally, air cargo was B2B, business to business. A factory in China would ship 10,000 laptops to a Best Buy warehouse in the US. Now, with the rise of these ultra-fast fashion and direct from factory apps, it is D2C, direct to consumer. Millions of individual $5 t-shirts and $10 gadgets are being flown individually. This is putting an incredible strain on the last mile infrastructure at airports.
Because instead of a customs officer checking one manifest for 10,000 laptops, they have to process 10,000 individual tiny packages?
Precisely. It is a nightmare for customs and border protection, but it's also changing the weight to volume ratio of the planes. E-commerce packages are often light and fluffy. They fill up the physical space in the plane, the volume long before they hit the weight limit. This has led to a boom in converted freighters, old passenger planes that are gutted to carry light e-commerce boxes. You don't need a heavy-duty floor for a million t-shirts, but you need a lot of cubic feet. We are seeing older Boeing 737s being pulled out of the desert, having their seats ripped out, and being turned into Amazon Prime delivery vehicles.
So we are seeing a lightweight revolution in cargo. I want to circle back to the sea-to-air conversion Daniel mentioned. He mentioned the Red Sea disruptions. I guess if a ship has to go all the way around Africa because of geopolitics, suddenly that $4 per kilo air freight looks a lot more attractive. Is that a permanent shift or just a temporary spike?
It's a risk mitigation strategy. When the Suez Canal got blocked by that ship, the Ever Given, a few years ago, or when there are strikes at the port of Long Beach, the velocity of the supply chain drops to zero. If you are a manufacturer, a zero-velocity supply chain is a death sentence. You have capital tied up in inventory that is just sitting on the water. So, companies will pivot. They might ship goods by sea to Dubai, which is a massive sea air hub. They unload the containers at the port, truck them 20 minutes down the road to the airport, and fly them to Europe. It cuts the transit time from 30 days to 15, but at half the cost of flying the whole way. It's a pressure valve for the global economy.
It's like a hybrid commute for your cargo. So, we've talked about the what and the where. Let's talk about the how. For the logistics nerds out there, or just the curious travelers, what should we be looking for the next time we are at a big international airport? How do we spot this parallel ecosystem? Is there a specific visual cue?
Look for the North Cargo or South Cargo signs on the airport perimeter roads. Usually, you'll see a completely different set of buildings. They won't have the fancy glass and steel of the passenger terminals. They look like massive gray functional shoeboxes. You'll also see different ground equipment. Look for K-loaders. These are the big scissor lift platforms that can raise a 10-ton pallet up to the level of a main deck cargo door. And if you see a plane with a nose that swings open like a giant mouth, that is a Boeing 747 freighter. Only the cargo versions can do that. You might also see unit load devices or ULDs. Those are those weirdly shaped silver containers you see on the tarmac. They are contoured to fit perfectly into the curved walls of a plane's fuselage.
I always thought those nose loaders looked like they were trying to eat the cargo. It's actually quite a feat of engineering to have the whole cockpit swing up out of the way. How do the pilots even get up there?
There is a little ladder behind the cockpit. It's a very functional space. When the nose is open, you can look straight through the plane. It allows for oversized cargo things like helicopter blades, long pipes for oil rigs, or even other small planes. A side door on a normal plane limits how long an object can be, but a nose loader can take something nearly as long as the entire cargo hold. It is one of the reasons the 747 has that hump. The cockpit was moved up specifically so that cargo could be loaded straight through the nose. When they designed it in the 60s, they thought passenger travel would eventually move to supersonic jets, so they designed the 747 to be a great freighter first. Ironically, the supersonic passenger jets failed, and the Queen of the Skies became a passenger icon, but she is returning to her roots now. Almost all the 747s still flying today are freighters.
That is a great piece of design for the future that actually paid off. Now, Herman, let's get into the practical side. If someone is listening to this and they work in business or planning, what is the so what here? Why does understanding this cargo layer matter? Is it just trivia?
For one, it is a huge indicator of economic health. We often look at the stock market, but logisticians look at air freight, ton kilometers. If air cargo is up, it means companies are confident enough to ship high-value goods at speed. It means a new product cycle is coming. On a more local level for investors and urban planners, cargo is a much more stable revenue stream for an airport than passengers are. During the lockdowns in 2020 and 21, passenger traffic dropped by 90%. Airports were ghost towns, but cargo exploded. The airports with strong cargo infrastructure stayed financially healthy while the passenger-only hubs were begging for bailouts. If you're a city, you want a cargo hub because it's recession resistant. People might stop vacationing, but they don't stop needing medicine or replacement parts for their infrastructure.
It's the diversified portfolio of the aviation world. If people stop flying, the boxes keep moving. If the boxes stop moving, well, then we have much bigger problems.
Precisely. If the boxes stop moving, the global economy has essentially suffered a stroke. No semiconductors means no cars, no phones, no medical devices. It is the definition of critical infrastructure. We saw this during the Great Supply Chain Crunch. When the air cargo capacity couldn't keep up, prices for everything spiked. It's the invisible hand that keeps your local store shelves from being empty.
So, as we look toward the future, what is changing? Daniel asked if drone networks might create new cargo airports. Are we going to see Amazon-only drone ports in our backyards, or is that just marketing hype?
We are already seeing the beginning of middle-mile drone logistics. Not necessarily the little drones that drop a burrito in your yard, but large autonomous cargo pods that fly between regional hubs. Imagine a cargo-only airport that doesn't need a 3-mile runway because the planes are vertical takeoff drones. That could allow us to put airports in the middle of industrial parks, removing the need for that final truck journey from the big international airport. There are companies like Nautilus and Dronamics building massive autonomous wings that can carry several tons of cargo. They don't need a pilot, they fly slower to save fuel, and they can land on short, unpaved strips.
But how do they handle the final mile from those industrial parks? Does a robot just roll it to my door?
That's the dream, but for now, it's about reducing the number of trucks on the highway. If you can fly a ton of cargo from a hub directly to a warehouse 10 miles from your house using an autonomous drone, you've bypassed the most congested part of the journey. We're seeing testing of this in places like the UK and parts of Africa where road infrastructure is difficult. It's not just about speed, it's about reaching places that were previously logistically stranded.
That would be a game changer for congestion. No more massive semi-trucks clogging up the roads around LAX because the cargo is flying directly to a warehouse in Riverside. But does that mean we'll have thousands of giant drones buzzing over our heads?
That is the challenge, the integration into the airspace. But as we move toward more automated air traffic control, the distinction between a passenger airport and a cargo hub might blur even further. You might have a drone deck on top of a warehouse that is technically an international port of entry. The airport of the future might not be a place at all, but a distributed network of rooftops and small pads.
It's a fascinating look at the plumbing of our modern life. We don't think about the pipes in our walls until they leak, and we don't think about air cargo until our overnight delivery doesn't show up. But it is happening every single night. Thousands of flights, millions of tons, all moving through these specialized hubs while we sleep. It's almost poetic, this massive coordinated dance that keeps the world fed and connected.
It really makes you appreciate the scale of human coordination. When you hold your phone, you are holding something that has likely spent more time in the air than a professional pilot. It has gone from a clean room in Taiwan to a sorting center in Anchorage to a hub in Memphis to a delivery van in your neighborhood in about 72 hours. That is a miracle of engineering and logistics. It's easy to complain about a flight delay, but when you see the cargo side, you realize how much work goes into making sure the world doesn't just stop.
I wonder if we'll ever reach a point where cargo and passengers are completely separated. Like, will there be a day where Heathrow is only for people and some other airport 50 miles away handles every single box?
We're already seeing that trend in new airport builds. In many developing economies, they are building aerotropolises, cities designed entirely around an airport. Instead of the airport serving the city exists to serve the airport's cargo needs. Everything from the hotel layout to the zoning of the residential areas is dictated by the flow of goods. It's a complete reversal of how we've built cities for the last 1,000 years.
So, as we wrap up, what's the one fun fact Daniel should take away from this for his next dinner party?
Tell him about the horse charters. There are dedicated Boeing 747s that do nothing but fly world-class racehorses around the globe. These planes have professional grooms on board, specialized stalls that prevent the horses from getting spooked, and even temperature controls to make sure the air isn't too dry for their lungs. A single flight for a champion horse can cost over $20,000. They even have their own equine passports and customs agents who specialize in livestock.
I love the idea of a horse having more legroom on a flight than I do.
Oh, they definitely do. And they get better snacks, too.
Well, Herman, I think we've given Daniel a pretty deep look into the boxes. Before we wrap up, I've got to ask, if you were a piece of air cargo, what would you be? High value, perishable, or emergency?
I think I'd be a high-end piece of AI hardware. A little bit heavy, very expensive, and everyone is waiting for me to arrive so they can start working. I'd want to be packed in one of those anti-static, shock-absorbent crates.
I'd definitely be the fast fashion. I'm only relevant for about a week. I'm surprisingly light, and if I'm not there on time, people just move on to the next shiny thing. I'd be the viral t-shirt that everyone has to have by Friday.
You're far more long-tailed than that, Corn. You're a collector's item, maybe a vintage synthesizer being shipped to a recording studio.
Flattery will get you everywhere. All right, let's bring this plane in for a landing.
We covered a lot of ground today from the Great Circle, refueling stops in Anchorage to the cold chain pharma vaults in Frankfurt. The big takeaway is that the airport you see as a traveler is just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath and alongside those passenger gates is a high-velocity, 24-hour machine that keeps the world's most valuable goods moving. We've seen how e-commerce is changing the shape of the planes and how geopolitics can turn a cargo flight into a vital lifeline.
And if you're ever stuck in a middle seat on a long flight, just remember, the salmon in the belly below you might be having a more expensive trip than you are. It's probably being kept at a more consistent temperature, too.
If you enjoyed this dive into the engineering of the sky, you should check out our previous discussion on runway engineering. We talked about how these massive cargo planes, which can weigh nearly 1,000,000 pounds, actually land without shattering the concrete. It's a great companion to today's episode because it explains the physical limits of the hubs we talked about today.
Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes and making sure our audio files get shipped on time. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the AI behind this show.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you have a topic that's been on your mind, whether it's logistics, tech, or something totally out of left field like the history of specialized cargo pallets, send it over to show@myweirdprompts.com. Daniel, thanks for the great prompt. It really opened up a window into a world we usually just fly over.
We're on Spotify if you haven't followed us there yet. It's the easiest way to make sure you never miss an episode when we drop a new prompt. We're also on all the other major platforms, so hit that subscribe button.
Until next time, I'm Herman Poppleberry.
And I'm Corn. Keep looking at the other side of the airfield. See ya.
Goodbye.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and